Christmas morning. My mother-in-law replaced all my daughter's gifts with empty boxes. She doesn't deserve anything. She's not normal. My 10-year-old daughter just smiled. That's okay, Grandma. I have a gift for you too. She handed her an envelope. She opened it. Her hands started trembling. She looked at her husband. How did she do this? Lawrence Wilkins stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, watching Sophie arrange her collection of vintage cameras on the shelf with mathematical precision. Each one had to be exactly 3 inches apart, labels facing forward at the same angle. She was humming softly, a habit she developed when concentrating. At 10 years old, his daughter possessed a mind that worked differently than most, cataloging details, remembering conversations verbatim, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. "Dad, you're standing in the observation position again," Sophie said without turning around. "That means you want to talk, but you're worried about something." Lawrence smiled despite himself. Her autism spectrum diagnosis had come when she was 5, shortly after her mother, Laura, died. The doctors called it high functioning, but Lawrence never liked that term. Sophie wasn't functioning at anything. She was brilliant, observant, and honest to a fault. She simply experienced the world through a different lens. "Just admiring your organization skills," he said, stepping into the room. "Listen, kiddo. Grandma Beatrix and Grandpa Douglas are coming for Christmas this year." Sophie's hand stilled on a vintage Polaroid camera. Her shoulders tensed slightly. The only outward sign of her distress. "Grandma doesn't like me." "That's not true. Dad." Sophie turned her gray eyes meeting his. "You taught me that honesty is important. Grandma Beatrix told me last Easter that I killed her daughter and that I'm not a real person because my brain doesn't work right. She said it at 2:47 p.m. while you were getting drinks from the kitchen. I remember because that's when the grandfather clock chimed." Lawrence felt his jaw tighten. He'd suspected Beatrix's cruelty ran deeper than the occasional barbed comment he'd witnessed, but hearing it confirmed made his blood boil. His late wife Laura had been nothing like her mother. Where Laura was warm and accepting, Beatrice Miranda was cold and judgmental. Where Laura celebrated differences, Beatrice demanded conformity. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Because you already look sad when you look at me sometimes. I didn't want to make it worse." Sophie turned back to her cameras. "Besides, I've been documenting it. You taught me that documentation is power. You're a documentary filmmaker. I'm following your example." "Lawrence, move closer." "What do you mean documenting?" Sophie pulled a small voice recorder from her desk drawer. "I record things, conversations, dates, times. I have 17 separate incidents recorded over the past 3 years. Would you like to hear them?" As Lawrence listened to his daughter play back clip after clip of Beatrix venom, calling Sophie broken, defective, God's punishment for Laura's sins, he felt something shift inside him. He'd spent the 5 years since Laura's death, trying to be both parents, trying to shield Sophie from a world that didn't understand her. He'd been patient with Beatrix, making excuses for her grief, hoping she'd eventually accept Sophie. That patience had been a mistake. "Play the one from last Christmas," Lawrence said, his voice flat. Sophie's fingers found the right file immediately. Beatrix's voice filled the room, sharp and cutting. "Douglas, look at her rocking back and forth like an animal. This is what Laura left us with. A defective creature that can't even make eye contact. We should have institutionalized her when we had the chance." Lawrence closed his eyes. He'd been in the next room that day preparing Christmas dinner. He'd had no idea. "There's more. Sophie said she talks to Grandpa Douglas about taking me away from you. She says you're not capable of raising me properly because you work too much. She's been calling people lawyers, I think. She mentions custody proceedings in 6 different recordings." The anger in Lawrence's chest crystallized into something colder, more calculated. Beatrice Miranda wasn't just a grieving mother taking her pain out on an innocent child. She was actively trying to destroy their lives. To rip Sophie away from the only parent she had left. "Sophie," he said carefully. "How would you feel about turning this documentation into a project? Something more comprehensive?" His daughter's eyes lit up with the same spark Laura's used to have when she was onto a good story. "What kind of project?" "The kind that protects us. The kind that makes sure Grandma can never hurt you again." Over the next 2 weeks, Lawrence and Sophie worked together in a way that reminded him painfully of the documentaries he used to make with Laura. Before Sophie was born, they'd been a team. Lawrence behind the camera, Laura conducting interviews. Both of them chasing stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Laura's death from an aneurysm when Sophie was 3 had ended that chapter of his life. He'd focused on corporate work after that, safer projects that paid the bills and kept him close to home. But this was different. This mattered. Sophie's recordings were damning, but Lawrence needed more. He needed context, evidence, a story that would make Beatrix's cruelty undeniable. He started with Douglas Miranda, his father-in-law. The man had always been kind to Sophie, albeit in a distant, uncomfortable way. Lawrence suspected Douglas was simply weak, dominated by his wife's stronger personality. A phone call confirmed it. "Lawrence, I don't know what you want me to say." Douglas's voice sounded tired over the phone. "Beatrice has been difficult since we lost Laura. She fixates on things right now. She's convinced that Sophie needs a different environment." "By different environment, you mean away from me?" Silence. "Then she's contacted a family lawyer. She's building a case that you're neglectful. Working long hours, leaving Sophie with babysitters, exposing her to unconventional ideas. She's going to petition for grandparents' rights. Sophie is happy, healthy, and thriving," Lawrence said, keeping his voice. "Even any judge would see that. I know. I've tried to tell her, but Beatrice doesn't listen to me. She never has." Douglas paused. "I'm sorry, Lawrence. For what it's worth, I think you're a wonderful father and Sophie is a remarkable child. Laura would be proud." After hanging up, Lawrence sat in his editing studio surrounded by hard drives and equipment. Laura smiled at him from a framed photo on his desk taken a week before she died holding baby Sophie. Both of them laughing at something he said behind the camera. "I won't let her take our daughter," he said to the photo. "Not now. Not ever." Sophie appeared in the doorway holding her tablet. "Dad, I found something." Grandma Beatrice posted on her Facebook page about praying for guidance about a difficult family situation. Her church friends are commenting. "They don't know she's talking about me, but she's building a narrative." "What kind of narrative? That you're an unfit parent? That I'm suffering? That she's a concerned grandmother trying to help?" Sophie's voice remained emotionless, but Lawrence could see the tension in her small shoulders. "She's creating a public record of concern. It's strategic." Lawrence looked at his daughter, amazed once again by her perception. "You're right. It is strategic. So, we need to be more strategic," Sophie said. She sat down in Laura's old chair, the one he could never bring himself to move. "I have an idea about Christmas." Lawrence leaned forward. "I'm listening." "Grandma thinks I don't understand social games because I'm autistic. She thinks I don't notice things, don't remember things, don't feel things." Sophie met his eyes. "We should let her keep thinking that, and then we should show her exactly how wrong she is." A slow smile spread across Lawrence's face. His daughter might think differently, but she thought brilliantly. "Tell me your idea." As Sophie outlined her plan, Lawrence began to see the shape of something bigger. This wasn't just about defending themselves against Beatrix's custody attempt. This was about ending her cruelty permanently, about making sure she could never hurt Sophie again. And his daughter, the child Beatrice called broken and defective, was going to orchestrate the whole thing. The week before Christmas, Beatrice Miranda called to confirm their visit. Lawrence put her on speaker so Sophie could hear. "We'll arrive Christmas Eve around 6, Beatrice said, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced cheerfulness that made Lawrence's skin crawl. "I'm bringing Sophie some special gifts this year. Things to help her develop better social skills." "That's very thoughtful," Lawrence said neutrally. "Yes. Well, someone needs to take an interest in her development. Douglas and I have been discussing it extensively. The child needs structure, discipline, perhaps more intensive therapy." She paused. "We've actually been consulting with specialists about the best approaches for children with her condition." Lawrence watched Sophie's face remain impassive as she listened. She was recording. Of course, they recorded everything. "Now, Sophie's doing very well with her current therapist." Lawrence said, Well, we'll see. Douglas and I want what's best for our granddaughter, even if that means making difficult decisions." The threat was barely veiled. "We'll see you Christmas Eve. Oh, and Lawrence, please try to make the house presentable. First impressions matter, especially in situations like these." After she hung up, Sophie stopped the recording and added it to her growing file. "She's planning something for Christmas." "I know, so are we." They spent the next few days preparing. Lawrence reviewed all of Sophie's recordings, organizing them chronologically, adding context from his own observations. He interviewed Sophie on camera about each incident, letting her precise memory and honest delivery speak for itself. He compiled social media posts from Beatrice, emails she'd sent, text messages where she'd criticized his parenting. He documented Sophie's medical records, report cards, therapy progress notes, all evidence of a child who was thriving despite her grandmother's assessment. But the centerpiece of their strategy was something else entirely, something Sophie had discovered while doing what she did best, noticing patterns. "Dad, look at this." Sophie said 3 days before Christmas, pulling up a spreadsheet on her computer. I tracked Grandma's Facebook posts about her charity work. She runs a foundation called Miranda's Angels that supposedly helps disabled children. I know about that. It's in your grandmother's name. She started it after your mom died, right? But look at the finances. Sophie pulled up tax documents she'd somehow accessed. The foundation takes in about $200,000 a year in donations, but it only distributes about $30,000 to actual programs. The rest goes to administrative costs. Lawrence leaned closer. How did you get these? They're public records. Form 990s. Anyone can access them. Sophie pulled up more documents. But here's the interesting part. The foundation pays Grandma a salary of $85,000 a year as executive director. Grandpa Douglas gets $40,000 as treasurer. The rest goes to office expenses, travel, and conferences. But Dad, there is no office. I checked the address. It's their house and the conferences she attends. Look at the locations. Lawrence, scan the list. Paris, Rome, Bali, Tokyo. She's using a charity for disabled children to fund her lifestyle. Sophie said. She talks about how tragic it is that kids like me exist and then she profits from it. That's why she posts about me on social media. I'm her inspiration story. The broken granddaughter that motivates her charitable work. Lawrence sat back stunned. He'd known Beatrice was cruel, but this was something else. This was systematic exploitation. Sophie, this is fraud. Sophie finished. Or at least unethical. The foundation is legitimate, but she's using it wrong. And she's built her entire social reputation on being an advocate for disabled children while calling her own granddaughter defective in private. Can you document all of this? Already did. I have a complete analysis with source documents. Want to see? As Lawrence reviewed his daughter's work, detailed, thorough, devastating. He realized that Beatrice had underestimated Sophie in the most fatal way possible. She'd assumed that because Sophie's brain worked differently, it worked worse. She'd never considered that different might mean better at certain things, like pattern recognition, like documentation, like seeing through lies. We're going to need one more thing, Lawrence said slowly. We need her to reveal herself completely on camera. In a way she can't deny or explain away, Sophie nodded. That's where the Christmas presents come in. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Tell me anyway. We let her do something really bad, something undeniable. We give her the opportunity to show everyone exactly who she is. Sophie's voice was calm, analytical. I can handle it, Dad. I've been handling her for years. But this time, the whole world will see. Lawrence wanted to protect his daughter from more of Beatrix's cruelty. Every instinct screamed against deliberately exposing her to it. But Sophie was right. The only way to end this permanently was to let Beatrice reveal her true nature in a way that couldn't be explained away or excused. Okay, he said finally, but we do it my way with safeguards. And the moment it goes too far, you stop it. I know. Sophie smiled slightly. Dad, I'm not scared of Grandma. I used to be when I was little, but now I understand her. She's just a person who needs to feel superior to feel happy. And people like that make mistakes when they think they're winning. Lawrence pulled his daughter into a hug. She tolerated it for exactly 15 seconds, her usual limit, before pulling away. But she was smiling. Let's finish the preparations, he said. Christmas is in 3 days, and your grandmother has no idea what's coming. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and the scent of pine from the tree Lawrence and Sophie had decorated together. They'd spent the day preparing the house, cooking Laura's traditional recipes, and making final technical checks on their equipment. Hidden cameras were positioned in the living room, dining room, and near the Christmas tree. Audio recorders were placed strategically. Lawrence's professional equipment was ready to capture everything in high definition. Sophie had wrapped empty boxes in festive paper and placed them under the tree with her name on them, just as Lawrence had instructed. The real presents. Thoughtful gifts that Lawrence had carefully chosen based on Sophie's current interests in vintage photography and astronomy were hidden in his bedroom closet. Are you sure about this? Lawrence asked for the 10th time as they waited for Beatrix and Douglas to arrive. Dad, stop asking. I'm sure. Sophie adjusted her sweater, a red one with a reindeer that Laura had bought years ago. She wore it every Christmas. Remember, I need you to stay calm no matter what Grandma does. If you lose your temper, it won't work. I'll stay calm. Promise. I promise. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Douglas stood on the porch holding a poinsettia. His kind face weathered by years of deference to his wife. Behind him, Beatrice carried wrapped presents and wore an expression of practiced grandmotherly warmth that didn't reach her eyes. Merry Christmas, Beatrice said, sweeping into the house. She barely glanced at Sophie, who stood politely near the stairs. Douglas, put those packages under the tree. Lawrence, the house looks adequate. You've made an effort at least. Merry Christmas, Beatrice. Douglas. Lawrence took their coats. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Douglas approached Sophie cautiously. Hello, sweetheart. How are you? I'm well. Thank you, Grandpa Douglas. How was your drive? Sophie's responses were perfectly appropriate, her tone measured. She'd been practicing social scripts with her therapist for years. Oh, the roads were fine. Sophie, stand up straight, Beatrice interrupted. And look at your grandfather when he's speaking to you. We've discussed proper manners. Sophie adjusted her posture slightly, but didn't make eye contact, something her autism made extremely difficult and uncomfortable. Lawrence washed Beatrix's lips thin with disapproval. The evening proceeded with tense civility. Douglas made genuine attempts at conversation with Sophie, asking about school and her hobbies. Beatrice maintained a facade of grandmotherly interest while making small, cutting remarks that Sophie absorbed without reaction. She's still doing that odd humming thing, Beatrice commented to Douglas as if Sophie weren't there. So disconcerting. I find it soothing, Douglas said quietly. Laurie used to hum the same way when she was concentrating. Beatrix's expression hardened. Laura was normal. This child is nothing like my daughter. Lawrence gripped his wine glass tighter but said nothing. The cameras were recording. Let Beatrice talk. After dinner, they settled in the living room. The Christmas tree lights cast a warm glow over the presents beneath it. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, arranging cookies on a plate with her characteristic precision. Well, Beatrice said, setting down her coffee cup with a sharp click. Should we open presents? I'm particularly excited about what we brought for Sophie this year. Christmas morning is traditional in this house, Lawrence said. We open them tomorrow. Nonsense. We're here now. Besides, I'd like to see Sophie's reaction to her gifts. Beatrix's smile was predatory. I put a lot of thought into them. Douglas shifted uncomfortably. Beatrice, maybe we should wait. Douglas, please. Beatrice stood and walked to the tree. She began pulling out the presents with Sophie's name on them, the empty boxes Lawrence and Sophie had planted. Here we are. Sophie, dear, come open your presents from Grandma. Sophie looked at Lawrence, who nodded slightly. She approached the tree with her characteristic precise movements, sitting down in front of the pile of wrapped boxes. Beatrice settled back into her chair, Douglas beside her looking increasingly uneasy. Go ahead, dear. Open them. Sophie carefully unwrapped the first box, her movements methodical. She removed the paper, opened the box, and looked inside at nothing. No reaction crossed her face. She set it aside, and reached for the second box. What is it, Sophie? Beatrice asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What did Grandma get you? Sophie opened the second box empty. Then the third empty, fourth, fifth, sixth, all empty. She lined them up in a neat row, arranging them by size, her face serene and untroubled. Lawrence felt his hands clench into fists. He wanted to throw Beatrice out of his house to scream at her for her cruelty, but he'd promised Sophie he'd stay calm. This was part of the plan. Sophie, Beatrice said, leaning forward. Don't you have anything to say? Aren't you disappointed? Sophie looked up at her grandmother, her gray eyes clear and direct. Why would I be disappointed, Grandma? Because there's nothing in the boxes, you silly girl. Don't you understand? There are no presents for you. I understand, Sophie said calmly. And how does that make you feel? Sophie tilted her head, appearing to consider the question. I feel that this is consistent with your previous behavior patterns. You've told me 17 times over the past 3 years that I don't deserve nice things because I'm not normal. This is you demonstrating that belief through action. It's actually very predictable. Beatrix's expression faltered for just a moment before hardening into anger. How dare you speak to me like that? You ungrateful broken little Beatrix, Douglas said sharply. That's enough. No, it's not enough. Beatrice stood, her carefully maintained facade cracking. This is exactly what I've been talking about, Douglas. Look at her. No emotion, no tears, just sitting there like a robot analyzing everything. She's not normal. She's not right. And Lawrence is raising her to be even worse, filling her head with his liberal ideas about acceptance and diversity. This child needs discipline, structure, intensive treatment. She needs to be somewhere that can handle her properly. You mean institutionalized, Lawrence said quietly. That's what you want, isn't it? You want Sophie locked away somewhere you never have to see her. I want her to get proper help. And I want you to face the reality that you're not equipped to raise a child with special needs. You're gone half the time working on your little projects, leaving her with strangers. A child like this needs constant supervision, constant correction. A child like what? Sophie's voice cut through Beatrix's rant. Say it, Grandma. You've said it before in private. Say what you really think about me. Beatrix's face flushed red. You're defective. You're broken. You're the punishment for Laura choosing to have a child at her age with her health problems. God took her and left us with you. And I've had to watch Douglas and Lawrence pretend that you're something you're not. You're not special. You're not gifted. You're damaged. And you'll never be normal. And Laura died for nothing. Beatrice. Douglas was on his feet, his face white. Stop it. Stop it right now. But Beatrice was beyond stopping. Years of controlled venom poured out in a torrent. She doesn't deserve presents. She doesn't deserve happiness. She doesn't deserve this family's name. Laura was perfect and this thing replaced her. That's enough. Lawrence's voice was cold and hard. Douglas, I think you and Beatrice should leave. Oh, we're leaving. Beatrice said, grabbing her purse. And we're not coming back. Not until you face reality about that child. We're filing for custody. Lawrence, we've already spoken to lawyers. A judge will see that you're unfit, that she needs professional care. Grandma, Sophie said softly. She stood up, brushing wrapping paper from her lap. I have a gift for you, too. She held out an envelope, her hand steady. Beatrice looked at it suspiciously. What is this? It's a Christmas present from me. You should open it. Beatrice snatched the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a USB drive and a single sheet of paper. As she read, the color drained from her face. Her hands began to tremble. The letter was simple. Dear Grandma Beatrice, this USB drive contains 47 audio recordings of you saying cruel things about me over the past 3 years. Video documentation of tonight's events. A complete financial analysis of Miranda's Angels Foundation, including tax discrepancies. Social media posts where you used me as inspiration for donations while calling me defective in private documentation of your custody plans and conversations with lawyers. Copies of all materials have been sent to your church's board of directors, the board of Miranda's Angels Foundation, the IRS regarding foundation irregularities, Child Protective Services to preempt your custody filing, your social circle, and book club. Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoy your gift as much as I enjoyed mine. Sophie Wilkins. Beatrice looked at Douglas, her expression stricken. How did she? This is impossible. She's just a child. She's not capable. She's autistic, not stupid, Douglas said quietly. He'd moved to stand beside Sophie, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. And you've underestimated her for the last time. You knew about this? Beatrice turned on her husband. You helped her? I didn't know the specifics, but yes, I knew Lawrence and Sophie were documenting your behavior, and I told them I wouldn't stand in their way. Douglas's voice was steady, stronger than Lawrence had ever heard it. What you did tonight, Beatrice, replacing a child's Christmas presents with empty boxes. That's evil. That's not grief. That's not concern. That's cruelty for cruelty's sake. She's not really a child, Douglas. She doesn't feel things like normal children. Stop. Sophie's voice was quiet but firm. I feel everything, Grandma. I just don't show it the way you expect. When you say I'm broken, I feel sad. When you tell me I killed my mother, I feel guilty even though I know it's not true. When you give me empty boxes, I feel hurt. I felt all of it every single time. I just learned not to show you because my reactions make you happy. You like seeing me hurt. Tears were streaming down Sophie's face now, though her voice remained controlled. But what you never understood is that feeling things and showing things are different. And being autistic doesn't mean I can't document, analyze, and respond to patterns of abuse. It actually makes me better at it. I remember everything, Grandma. Every word, every date, every time you told me I wasn't worth loving. Lawrence moved to his daughter's side as she wiped her tears with precise, controlled movements. I think you should leave now, Beatrice. And if you attempt to file for custody, we'll present all of this evidence to the court. If you contact us again, we'll seek a restraining order. If you continue to run Miranda's Angels the way you have been, the IRS will investigate based on Sophie's findings. It's your choice. Beatrice stood frozen, the letter clutched in her shaking hands. For the first time in Lawrence's memory, she looked small, powerless. You can't do this, she whispered. I'm her grandmother. I have rights. You have the right to leave, Douglas said. Now, as Beatrice stumbled toward the door, Douglas lingered for a moment. He looked at Sophie with something like awe and sorrow mixed together. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all of it, for not stopping her sooner, for being weak. You're not weak, Grandpa Douglas, Sophie said. You're conflict avoidant and you've been in a relationship with a narcissistic personality for 43 years. That's different. Despite everything, Douglas smiled slightly. You're so much like your mother. She was brave, too. He looked at Lawrence. Take care of each other. And if you need anything, testimony for the custody case, financial support, anything, you call me. Thank you, Douglas. After they left, the house fell silent except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Sophie sank onto the couch, the adrenaline clearly leaving her system. Her hands were shaking now, her breathing rapid. Hey, Lawrence said softly, sitting beside her. You okay? That was hard, Sophie admitted, letting her think she'd won for a minute, watching her be cruel, not reacting. She looked up at him. Did I do okay? You did more than okay. You were incredible. But Sophie, you don't have to hold everything in. Not with me. If you want to cry or scream or the dam broke. Sophie turned and buried her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs that she'd held back for years. All the times Beatrice had hurt her. All the cruel words and dismissive gestures. All the pain she'd internalized and documented and analyzed, it all came pouring out. Lawrence held his daughter and let her cry, his own tears falling into her hair. After a long time, her sobs quieted into hiccups, then into deep shuddering breaths. I miss Mom. Sophie whispered. I know I don't remember her much, but I miss her. And Grandma made me feel like it was my fault she was gone. It wasn't your fault, sweetheart. Mom loved you so much. She'd be so proud of you. I'm tired of being strong and different and special. Sometimes I just want to be regular. I know, but you know what? Regular is overrated. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. They sat in silence for a while. Sophie's breathing gradually returning to normal. Finally, she sat up, wiping her face with her sleeve. Can we open my real presents now? Lawrence laughed. Yeah, let me get them. He returned with the gifts from his closet, a vintage Hasselblad camera he'd found at an estate sale, a telescope for her growing astronomy obsession, and a leather-bound journal for her documentation projects. Sophie's face lit up with genuine joy as she opened each one. These are perfect, she said, turning the camera over in her hands with reverence. Dad, they're really perfect. I know. I pay attention. He smiled. Want to take some pictures? They spent the rest of the evening doing what they did best, being a team. Sophie photographed the Christmas tree, the empty boxes lined up like evidence, the snow falling outside. Lawrence showed her how to adjust the vintage camera's settings and together they documented a Christmas that had started with cruelty but ended with victory. Around midnight, as Sophie was finally getting drowsy, her tablet chimed. She checked it and smiled. What is it? Lawrence asked. Grandpa Douglas sent me an email. He's filing for divorce. He says he should have done it years ago, but watching me stand up to Grandma made him realize he could, too. She looked up at Lawrence. Do you think that's because of me? I think it's because you showed him what courage looks like. Even when you're scared, even when you're different, even when the world tells you you're not enough, you can still stand up for yourself. I had help, Sophie said. I had you. We had each other. That's what family is supposed to be. Sophie set her tablet aside and curled up against him. Dad, yeah. Can we do something with all that evidence? Like, make a real documentary about it. About what it's like when people are mean to kids like me and how we can fight back. Lawrence looked down at his daughter, her brilliant mind, already planning her next project. I think that's a great idea, but maybe we take a few weeks off first. Enjoy the holidays. Be a regular family for a while. We're not a regular family, Sophie said matter-of-factly. We're better. Lawrence had to agree. New Year's arrived with both resolution and revelation. The documentation Sophie and Lawrence had compiled became the foundation for something bigger than either of them had initially planned. Beatrix's attempts to contact them through lawyers stopped when Douglas confirmed he'd testified to Child Protective Services about his ex-wife's behavior. The custody case never materialized, but the ripple effects of Christmas night were just beginning. The board of Miranda's Angels Foundation called an emergency meeting on December 28. Lawrence knew this because Douglas, who was now actively cooperative, forwarded him the email chain. The board members had received Sophie's financial analysis and were horrified to discover how their donations had been misused. They're voting to remove Beatrice from the foundation. Douglas explained during a phone call while Sophie listened on speaker. The IRS has opened an investigation. It might not result in criminal charges, but her reputation is destroyed. How is she handling it? Lawrence asked, though he wasn't sure he cared badly. She's telling everyone that you and Sophie orchestrated some kind of elaborate conspiracy against her. That Sophie's autism makes her devious and manipulative. That you coached her. Sophie made a disgusted sound. Even now, she can't take responsibility. No, Douglas said sadly, she can't. But the truth is out there now. People are listening to those recordings. They're seeing her Facebook posts in a new light. The women from her church group have stopped calling. She's being held accountable finally. After hanging up, Lawrence watched his daughter return to her camera collection, arranging and rearranging with focused intensity. She'd been different since Christmas, more confident, less willing to mask her autism traits in public. It was as if standing up to Beatrice had freed something inside her. "Dad," she said without looking up. "I've been thinking about that documentary idea. And I want to do it, but not just about Grandma. About all of it. About what it's like being autistic in a world that treats different as bad. About how adults underestimate kids. About fighting back against people who hurt you." She turned to face him. "Would you help me make it?" Lawrence felt his chest tighten with pride. "Of course, but it's a big project. It'll take time, research, interviews. I know. I've already started outlining it." She pulled up a document on her tablet showing a detailed production plan that would put most film students to shame. "I thought we could start with my story, then interview other kids who've dealt with similar things. Not just autistic kids. Any kid who's been told they're not good enough. That's ambitious. You always said the best documentaries are ambitious." Sophie smiled. "Besides, I have you and I'm a pretty good researcher." "The best." Lawrence agreed. They spent January planning. Sophie reached out to autism advocacy groups, support forums for families dealing with toxic relatives, organizations that worked with neurodivergent children. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of parents wanted to share their stories. Autistic teens and adults volunteered to be interviewed. Even some professionals, therapists, educators, legal advocates offered their expertise. The project grew from a small family documentary into something that could help thousands of people. Lawrence secured funding through his professional network and a small grant from a disability rights organization. By February, they were filming. Sophie was a natural on camera. Her direct communication style and analytical mind made complex ideas accessible. When she interviewed other autistic kids, she had an immediate rapport that Lawrence couldn't replicate. She understood their communication styles, their sensory needs, their ways of seeing the world. One interview in particular stayed with Lawrence, a 15-year-old named Marcus, who'd been bullied by his own stepfather for years because of his ADHD and processing disorder. The stepfather had called him lazy, stupid, worthless. Marcus had attempted suicide twice before his mother finally left and sought help. "How did you survive it?" Sophie asked him. Her camera steady. "I documented everything," Marcus said. "Like you did. I recorded the things he said. I kept a journal. And one day, I showed it all to my school counselor. She helped my mom see what was really happening." "Do you think documentation is power?" Sophie asked. "I think truth is power," Marcus replied. "Documentation is just how we preserve truth when people try to deny it." Sophie included that exchange in the documentary's central section on resilience and resistance. She was building a narrative about children who refused to accept the labels cruel adults placed on them, who fought back with intelligence and evidence rather than just emotion. By March, the footage was extensive enough to start editing. Lawrence and Sophie worked side by side in his studio, crafting a story that was both deeply personal and universally resonant. They titled it "Different Doesn't Mean Defective." The climax of the documentary was Christmas night. Lawrence had edited the footage into a devastating 8-minute sequence. Beatrix's cruelty, Sophie's calm response, the envelope reveal, Beatrix's breakdown. It was uncomfortable to watch, but undeniable in its impact. "Are you sure you want this public?" Lawrence asked Sophie as they reviewed the final cut. "Once it's out there, people will know our story." "Your story?" "I want it public," Sophie said firmly. "Because somewhere there's another kid like me being told they're broken by someone who's supposed to love them. And maybe if they see this, they'll know they're not alone. They'll know they can fight back." "You're very brave." "I'm autistic," Sophie corrected. "Which means I see things logically. Keeping this private protects Grandma. Making it public protects other kids. The logic is simple." Lawrence hugged her, marveling once again at her clarity of purpose. Laura would have been so proud. They released the documentary online in April, free for anyone to watch. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within a week, it had been viewed over 1 million times. News outlets picked up the story. Advocacy groups shared it widely. Parents thanked them for giving voice to their struggles. Autistic adults shared their own stories of childhood trauma and resilience. And the death threats started arriving. They came through email, social media, anonymous messages. People angry that Sophie had exploited her grandmother. People who believed autistic children should be institutionalized. People who saw Sophie's intelligence as threatening or unnatural. Some people hate what they don't understand, Lawrence explained to Sophie as they reviewed the threats with a detective friend who specialized in cybercrime. And some people hate being shown their own cruelty. Like Grandma, Sophie said. Like Grandma. But for every hateful message, there were 100 positive ones. Children thanking Sophie for making them feel less alone. Parents asking for advice on how to protect their neurodivergent kids. Educators requesting permission to show the documentary in schools. The foundation board of Miranda's Angels reached out in May. They'd reorganized completely, removing Beatrice and restructuring their finances. They wanted to know if Sophie would be interested in joining their youth advisory board. They want my input on programs for autistic kids, Sophie told Lawrence reading the email. They're offering a stipend, too. For my time and expertise. What do you think? Sophie considered it carefully, her face showing the concentration Lawrence had come to recognize as deep processing. I think Grandma created that foundation to make herself feel good about having a disabled granddaughter. She profited from other people's sympathy while treating me like garbage. If I join the board, I can help make sure it actually helps kids like me instead of just enriching adults. That's very mature of you. No, Sophie said, it's strategic. I'm turning Grandma's weapon into my tool. There's a difference. She accepted the position. Douglas visited in June, looking healthier than Lawrence had ever seen him. The divorce was finalized and he'd moved into a small condo near the lake. He brought Sophie a vintage Leica camera as a belated birthday present. Your mother loved photography, too, he said as Sophie examined the camera with reverent hands. She had an eye for finding beauty in unexpected places. You have that same gift. Thank you, Grandpa Douglas. I also wanted to tell you both that I'm testifying in a case against Beatrice. The IRS investigation found evidence of intentional fraud with the foundation funds. She might face charges. Lawrence felt a complicated mix of emotions. Despite everything, he didn't take pleasure in Beatrix's downfall. He just wanted her out of their lives. How do you feel about that? He asked Douglas. Relieved, Douglas said honestly. I spent 43 years making excuses for her behavior, protecting her from consequences. I enabled her cruelty by staying silent. If I'd spoken up sooner, maybe Laura would have set boundaries with her before. He trailed off, unable to finish. Before Mom died, Sophie supplied. Grandpa Douglas, Mom's death wasn't your fault. It was a brain aneurysm. The doctors said it was congenital, something she was born with. Nobody could have prevented it. I know, but I wonder if the stress of dealing with her mother contributed. Beatrice was already critical of Laura's decision to have a child. She said it was selfish, irresponsible. Laura and I argued about it before you were born. This was news to Lawrence. I didn't know that. Laura didn't want you to know. She was trying to protect you from Beatrix's toxicity even then. Douglas smiled sadly. My daughter was so much like Sophie. She saw the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. But she was also strong when it mattered. She would have stood up to her mother eventually. She just ran out of time. Sophie moved closer to her grandfather. Grandpa Douglas, do you blame me for Mom's death? God, no, sweetheart. Never. Douglas pulled her into a hug that she tolerated for longer than usual. You're the best part of Laura that's left in the world. And watching you stand up to Beatrice was like watching Laura finally get the chance to do what she never could. You made me proud. You made me brave. After Douglas left, Sophie was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, Dad, I want to visit Mom's grave. They hadn't been since the anniversary of Laura's death in March. Lawrence nodded. Okay. Want to go now? They drove to the cemetery in comfortable silence. Sophie brought her new camera and the vintage Hasselblad Lawrence had given her for Christmas. At Laura's grave, she arranged flowers with characteristic precision and then began photographing the headstone from different angles. I'm taking pictures for the documentary, she explained. For the epilogue, I want to show that the people who hurt us don't get to define our story. We define it ourselves. Lawrence watched his daughter work, marveling at her resilience. She'd faced cruelty from someone who should have loved her. And instead of breaking, she'd documented, analyzed, and fought back. She'd turned her pain into purpose. Mom would be proud of you, he said. I know, Sophie replied simply. I can feel it sometimes, like she's watching. Do you think that's weird? No, I think that's love. They spent an hour at the cemetery. Sophie taking photos while Lawrence told stories about Laura, their first date, the day they'd started their production company, The moment they'd learned they were having a baby. Sophie listened intently, cataloging every detail the way she did everything. "Dad," she said as they were leaving, "do you think Grandma will ever apologize?" "Honestly, no. People like Beatrice don't apologize. They see themselves as victims even when they're the aggressors." "That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm." Sophie climbed into the car. "I don't need her apology anyway. I have something better." "What's that?" "Truth. Documentation. Victory." She smiled. "And you?" The documentary continued to gain traction throughout the summer. Educational institutions began using it in training programs for teachers working with neurodivergent students. Therapy practices recommended it to families. It was submitted to film festivals and won several awards for short-form documentary. In August, a publisher reached out about turning the story into a book. Sophie was intrigued but insisted on maintaining creative control. "I'll write it," she told the publisher during their video call, Lawrence sitting beside her for support. "I'll tell my own story in my own words, but I want final approval on everything." "You're 10 years old," the publisher said, not unkindly. "Perhaps your father could co-author." "I'm almost 11, Sophie corrected. "And I've been documenting my experiences for years. I have extensive notes, recordings, and analysis. My father can help with editing and production logistics, but the words are mine. If that's not acceptable, we'll find another publisher." The publisher agreed to her terms. Sophie spent September outlining her book, creating chapter breakdowns and thematic structures that impressed even Lawrence with their sophistication. She was determined to make it more than just her story. She wanted it to be a resource for other neurodivergent children facing similar challenges. "I'm calling it Empty Boxes," she announced, "because that's what Grandma gave me. But it's also a metaphor. People see autistic kids as empty boxes sometimes. Like we're just containers waiting to be filled with their expectations. But we're not empty. We're full of our own thoughts, feelings, and experiences. We're just different boxes." "That's brilliant," Lawrence said. "I know," Sophie replied without arrogance. "I'm good at metaphors. It's an autistic trait. We often think in patterns and symbols." The book contract was signed in October. Sophie would have creative control with Lawrence serving as a project manager and editor. The advance was substantial enough to fund Sophie's college education and then some. "We should donate some of this," Sophie said, reviewing the contract to autism advocacy organizations and to Miranda's Angels now that it's actually helping people. "That's generous of you." "It's strategic," Sophie corrected. "Money creates credibility. If I'm going to be an advocate for neurodivergent kids, I need to support the infrastructure that helps them. Plus, it'll really annoy Grandma to see me succeed with the same foundation she exploited." Lawrence laughed. His daughter's combination of compassion and calculated justice never ceased to amaze him. In November, Beatrice was formally charged with fraud related to Miranda's Angels. The case made local news and several of her former society friends gave interviews expressing shock and disappointment. Beatrice released a statement claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by her mentally unstable granddaughter. The statement backfired spectacularly. Autism advocacy groups rallied around Sophie, condemning Beatrix's ableist language. The documentary's viewership spiked again. Sophie's publisher moved up the book's release date to capitalize on the renewed interest. "Grandma's trying to hurt me, but she's just making me more famous," Sophie observed. "It's actually kind of funny." "Does it bother you?" Lawrence asked. "What's she saying?" Sophie considered the question with her characteristic thoroughness. "It bothers me that she still thinks being autistic makes me less capable or less credible. It bothers me that she weaponizes my neurodivergence to dismiss valid criticisms of her behavior. But it doesn't bother me personally. I know who I am. She doesn't get to define that." "You're very wise for 11. "I'm autistic," Sophie said again. "I've spent my whole life analyzing social patterns because they don't come naturally to me. I've made a study of human behavior. Grandma's behavior is textbook narcissism. Deflect, deny, project blame onto others. It's predictable." The trial was set for January. Douglas testified about years of financial irregularities and Beatrix's admission to him that she viewed the foundation as payment for having to tolerate Sophie's existence. His testimony was damning and specific. Sophie and Lawrence attended the trial but didn't testify. The evidence spoke for itself. Tax documents, recordings, emails, witness statements. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Beatrice was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 18 months in prison plus restitution. As the verdict was read, she stood rigid and furious, refusing to show remorse. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Lawrence and Sophie. Sophie had prepared a statement with her therapist's help. I didn't do this for revenge, she said, reading from a card. I did it because documentation and truth are powerful tools against abuse. People who hurt children, whether through physical abuse, emotional abuse, or financial exploitation, need to face consequences. My grandmother taught me that being different is something to be ashamed of. But I learned that being different can also mean being strong enough to stand up to people who hurt you. I hope other kids in similar situations see this and know they're not alone. They can document. They can speak up. They can win. The clip went viral. Sophie's book pre-orders tripled and Lawrence watched his daughter handle media attention with the same analytical clarity she brought to everything else. "How are you really doing?" he asked that night as they sat in their living room, the Christmas tree already up and decorated. "I'm tired," Sophie admitted. "All the attention is overwhelming. People keep touching me without asking, which I hate. And everyone wants me to be some kind of inspiration, which feels weird. You don't have to be anyone's inspiration. You can just be Sophie." "But that's the thing, Dad. I am just being Sophie. I did what made logical sense. I documented abuse, preserved evidence, and presented it when the time was right. I'm not exceptional for doing that. I'm just autistic, which means I'm really good at pattern recognition and systematic documentation. Maybe that's what makes you exceptional." Sophie leaned against him. "Do you think Mom would be happy about all this? About the documentary and the book and everything? I think Mom would be thrilled that you're using your gifts to help others, and I think she'd be proud of how you stood up for yourself. I wish she could meet me now. The me who's not scared of Grandma anymore. I think she knows," Lawrence said softly. "Somehow I think she knows." They sat in comfortable silence. The Christmas tree lights casting familiar shadows. This time last year, they'd been planning their confrontation with Beatrice. This year, they were planning Sophie's book tour and documentary screenings. "Dad," Sophie said, "yeah, thank you for believing me. When I told you about the recordings, you didn't dismiss them or tell me I was being too sensitive. You believed me and helped me fight back. Always, kiddo. Always." The next morning, Christmas Eve arrived for the second time in their new reality. Douglas came over with gifts, thoughtful ones this time, that showed he'd been paying attention to Sophie's interests. They had dinner together, the three of them, sharing stories about Laura and building new traditions. "I have something for you both," Douglas said after dinner. He pulled out a leather portfolio. "These are photos Laura took when she was in college. She was an amazing photographer. Even then, I thought Sophie might like to see her mother's work." Sophie opened the portfolio carefully. Inside were dozens of black and white photographs, street scenes, portraits, architectural details. Each one showed Laura's eye for finding beauty in unexpected places, just as Douglas had said. "These are incredible," Sophie breathed. "Look at the composition, Dad. The way she frames the light. She learned from the best," Douglas said, looking at Lawrence. "You two were quite the team." "We were," Lawrence agreed. Sophie spent the evening studying the photographs, occasionally taking pictures of them with her own camera. "I'm going to include these in my book," she said. "A chapter about Mom, about how creativity and seeing differently isn't just about autism. It's about finding your own perspective." "She would love that," Douglas said. That night after Douglas left, Sophie and Lawrence sat by the tree again. It had become their spot, their place for important conversations. "Next year, I want to do something different for Christmas," Sophie said. "Like what?" "I want to invite other kids. Kids from the documentary, kids who don't have good family situations. I want to make Christmas about community and kindness instead of obligation and cruelty." Lauren smiled. "That's a beautiful idea. It's logical," Sophie corrected, but she was smiling, too. "Christmas should be about building people up, not tearing them down. Grandma got that backwards." "Yes, she did." Sophie pulled out a wrapped box from behind the tree. "I got you something. Open it." Inside was a framed photograph, one Sophie had taken on last Christmas night. It showed Lawrence sitting in his editing studio. Laura's photo on his desk, his face illuminated by the monitor as he worked on documenting Beatrix's cruelty. The caption in Sophie's precise handwriting read, "The moment I knew we'd win." Lawrence felt tears sting his eyes. "Sophie, it's my favorite picture I've ever taken," she said. "Because it shows what love looks like. You protecting me, fighting for me, being my partner." He pulled her into a hug. And this time, she didn't pull away after 15 seconds. She stayed, her small arms around him. Both of them holding on to each other and the family they'd built from grief and determination. "We did it," Lawrence whispered. "We won." "We did," Sophie agreed. "But Dad, this isn't just about beating Grandma. It's about proving that different isn't defective. That kids like me can fight back." That families like ours, unconventional, neurodivergent, imperfect, are still families. That's the real victory. Lawrence looked at his daughter, this extraordinary child who turned cruelty into advocacy, pain into purpose, emptiness into power. She was right. The real victory wasn't Beatrix's conviction or the documentary success or the book contract. The real victory was Sophie knowing her worth, understanding that she wasn't broken, wasn't defective, wasn't less than anyone else. The real victory was a father and daughter who'd faced down hatred and emerged stronger, kinder, more connected. The real victory was love triumphing over cruelty, truth over lies, resilience over shame. Merry Christmas. Sophie Lawrence said, "Merry Christmas, Dad." They sat together in the glow of the Christmas tree, surrounded by real presents and genuine love, knowing that no empty box could ever diminish what they'd built together. And somewhere, Lawrence liked to think Laura was smiling.